Late at night, in the dead silence of an old station, I heard it, a voice echoing through the darkness. It wasn't calling for any train I knew. It spoke of a place that didn't exist, a journey that was never meant to happen. And yet, it felt like it was waiting for me. It was a night like any other. I stood on the empty platform, waiting for the last train. The air was damp, the station quiet, almost too quiet. I could hear the faint hum of distant electricity and the occasional drip of water. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by an announcement. A cold, mechanical voice echoed through the station, calling out a destination I'd never heard before. Rookhaven. My heart skipped a beat. There was no such train, no such place. Yet the voice felt real. Too real. It was late, and the station was almost deserted. The few people who were around had already left, leaving me standing alone under the flickering lights. The cold air wrapped around me, making every breath visible. I was waiting, as usual, for the last train, lost in my thoughts, when the announcement echoed through the empty station. The train to Rookhaven will be departing from Platform 4. Please mind the gap. At first, I thought I was mistaken. I knew every train route in the area, and there had never been a train to Rookhaven. The voice sounded cold, mechanical, yet there was something unsettling about it. It wasn't just the words, but the way they hung in the air, as if the station itself was holding a breath that no one else could feel. I felt my pulse quicken. My eyes darted around, searching for someone else who might have heard it too. But the station remained empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, terribly wrong. That name, Rookhaven, echoed in my mind, strange and unfamiliar. It felt like a piece of a puzzle I wasn't meant to find. I told myself it was just a mistake, maybe a glitch in the system. But deep down, I couldn't convince myself. The voice sounded too deliberate, too real. And it left me with a question that refused to go away. If the train wasn't real, why did it feel like it was calling for me? This unsettling thought gripped me as I stood frozen on the platform, trying to make sense of the impossible. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of that strange announcement. The name Rookhaven echoed in my mind like a distant whisper that refused to fade. I had to find out what it meant. I spent hours going through old documents and forgotten records at the local library. The dust-covered files seemed untouched for years, and the yellowed pages told stories from a time long past. Among the old station blueprints, I found something peculiar, a faded map that mentioned Rookhaven. According to the records, it was part of a railway expansion plan from decades ago. But something wasn't right. The documents abruptly ended, as if someone had intentionally erased the project from history. There were no reasons, no explanations, just a dead end. The few notes I could find spoke in hushed tones about Rookhaven, hinting at something more sinister. Some mentioned construction halted due to financial issues, but there were whispers of darker reasons. Stories of accidents, mysterious disappearances, and workers who spoke of hearing things late at night. Voices calling out from empty tunnels, footsteps echoing in the dark. The more I read, the more I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if the station itself had secrets it didn't want to share. But one thing became clear. Rookhaven wasn't just a forgotten plan. It was something else, something that refused to be buried in the past. And now, it seemed, it was reaching out to me, pulling me into its mystery. The station looked different that night. The usual hum of life was gone, replaced by a suffocating stillness. The air felt colder, heavier, pressing down on my chest with every step I took. Shadows stretched longer than they should have, their jagged edges dancing along the cracked walls. I stood on Platform 4, the same spot where I'd heard the strange announcement before. The silence wasn't comforting. It was alive, as though the station itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. My eyes scanned the empty tracks, dreading that voice. Then it came, clearer and colder than before. The train to Rookhaven will be departing from Platform 4. Please mind the gap. My heart pounded, each beat louder than the last. This time, the voice felt sharper, almost as if it was addressing me directly. There was something in its tone, an urgency, a command. I couldn't move, trapped between fear and curiosity. It felt like the air around me was charged with an invisible force, drawing me closer to the edge of the platform. The dim lights flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to shift and move on their own. The entire station felt alive, pulsing with an unnatural energy. My breath came in shallow gasps as I tried to steady myself, but the ground beneath me felt unstable, as if it could crumble at any moment. And then, in the eerie quiet that followed the announcement, I heard something else. Faint, but unmistakable. The sound of a train approaching, though no lights shone from the tunnel. My stomach churned with dread as the echo of phantom wheels rattled in the darkness, growing louder, closer. I couldn't sleep after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that announcement echoing in my head. I needed answers, but what I found only raised more questions. I returned to the library, determined to dig deeper. This time, I unearthed something buried even further back, a collection of personal accounts from workers who had been involved in the original station's expansion. Their stories were strange, filled with fragments of fear and confusion. One account, in particular, stood out. A foreman wrote about how construction crews would hear things, voices echoing in empty tunnels, calling names or whispering warnings. Some workers claimed they saw figures in the darkness, shadows that moved on their own. Others described a cold presence, as though someone or something was watching from just beyond the light. But the most chilling detail was the mention of Rookhaven. According to the foreman, Rookhaven wasn't just a name. It was a place that existed in the station's early plans, a destination that had been abandoned without reason. The workers believed it was more than a failed project. They spoke in hushed tones about how Rookhaven was cursed, that anyone who tried to bring it to life met with strange accidents, unexplained disappearances. As I read, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The past wasn't just a collection of forgotten records. It was alive, lingering in the present, blurring the line between what was and what still is. And now, I was caught in its shadow. That night, I knew I had to face whatever was waiting for me. The pull to return to the station was irresistible, like an unseen force guiding my every step. The streets were silent, the air unnaturally cold as I approached the entrance. Each step echoed in the emptiness, a reminder that I was utterly alone. As I stood on platform 4, the familiar chill crept up my spine. The station felt different, heavier, as though the walls themselves were pressing inward. The lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to shift and move. Then, the voice returned. "The train to Rookhaven is now boarding. Please mind the gap." But this time it felt personal. The words hung in the air, wrapping around me, pulling me closer to the edge. My heart pounded, my hands trembling. I knew I should run, leave this place behind, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, compelled to stay and watch. A low rumble began to build in the distance. The ground beneath my feet trembled slightly, and the air was filled with the haunting sound of wheels on tracks. The noise grew louder, closer, yet there was no sign of a train. Only the sound, relentless and chilling, growing more deafening by the second. Then, from the darkness of the tunnel, a figure emerged. Not a train, but a shadowy shape, impossible to define. It moved toward me, and as it drew closer, the temperature plummeted. I could feel its presence, oppressive and cold, as though the very essence of Rookhaven had come to life. I wanted to scream, to run, but I could do nothing but stand there, frozen in terror as the shadow loomed closer. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Inside me, around me. The station, the shadow, the announcement. They weren't just experiences. They felt like a warning, a message meant only for me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow, felt the cold, heard the announcement echoing in my mind. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that my mind had played tricks on me in the dark. But the memories were too vivid, too chilling to dismiss. I could still feel the cold air wrapping around me, the vibration of phantom wheels on tracks that led nowhere. I never went back to the station. The thought of standing there again, waiting for a train that didn't exist, was too much. Yet I couldn't escape the feeling that the station wasn't done with me, that Rookhaven, whatever it was, still lingered, waiting in the shadows. Even now, on quiet nights, when the world seems asleep, I sometimes hear it, faint but unmistakable. The sound of a distant announcement calling out for a train that was never built. And I wonder, was it a warning or was I being invited to something far more sinister? Even now, the memory haunts me. Late at night, when silence blankets everything, I still hear it. The faint echo of a train announcement from nowhere. It's a sound that doesn't belong, yet feels impossibly real. The shadow of Rookhaven lingers, a constant reminder that some things refuse to stay buried. Have you ever experienced something that shouldn't exist? Something that chills you to your core? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales. The evening started like any other. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the backyard as the streetlights flickered to life. My friends and I had gathered at Ethan's house, the biggest on the block, with its sprawling yard and maze-like hallways. It was the perfect spot for our favorite game, hide and seek. We were all there: Ethan, Mia, Josh, and me. It was a game we had played 100 times, but that night felt different. The air was heavy, and the usual laughter seemed subdued. Maybe it was the way the wind whispered through the trees, or how the distant sound of rustling leaves felt louder than normal. But we shrugged it off. After all, it was just a game. What could go wrong? Ethan volunteered to be the seeker first, counting down loudly as we scrambled to find hiding spots. I darted inside, heart racing, and tucked myself behind the long, dusty curtains in the old living room. From my spot, I could hear the distant echoes of Ethan counting, his voice bouncing off the walls. 10, 9, 8. His voice trailed off, replaced by silence. It was then that I felt it, the eerie stillness that settled over the house. My heart thudded in my chest, and I held my breath, listening for any sign of the others. Footsteps creaked down the hallway, slow and deliberate. But something felt off. They weren't the light, quick steps of Ethan. These were heavier, dragging, almost hesitant. I peeked through the gap in the curtain, expecting to see Ethan pass by. Instead, the hallway was empty. The footsteps continued, moving closer. My palms grew sweaty, and every fiber of my being told me to stay hidden. But the urge to know who, or what, was out there was overwhelming. Slowly, I stepped out, heart pounding in my ears. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by the flickering bulb above. The footsteps stopped. I glanced around, trying to spot anyone, but the house was silent again, save for the soft hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. Suddenly, a whisper brushed past my ear. "Found you." I spun around, expecting to see Ethan grinning, but there was no one. The hall was empty. My pulse raced as I backed up, nearly tripping over my own feet. A chill ran down my spine, and I hurried to the back door, where I found Mia crouched under the porch, her face pale. "You heard it too?" she whispered, eyes wide with fear. I nodded, trying to catch my breath. Before I could say anything, we heard Ethan's voice calling from the front yard. "Ready or not, here I come." But it didn't make sense. If Ethan was still outside counting, who, or what, had whispered to me inside? We decided to stick together, creeping through the house, searching for Josh. The old floorboards creaked beneath our feet, and every shadow seemed to stretch and twist in the dim light. The house felt alive, as though it was watching us, waiting. As we turned a corner, we saw Josh standing at the end of the hallway, his back to us. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. He wasn't moving, his shoulders were stiff, and something about his posture was off. "Josh?" Mia called out, her voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned his head, and for a moment, I wished he hadn't. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking, as though he had seen something terrible. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He lifted his hand and pointed behind us. We turned slowly, and that's when we saw it. A figure, barely visible, standing in the shadows. It wasn't like us. Its form was indistinct, shifting, as if it was made of the darkness itself. Its eyes, cold and hollow, stared right at us. Panic surged through me. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Mia's hand. We bolted down the hallway, pulling Josh along. The house seemed to twist and stretch around us, the walls narrowing, the air growing colder. The figure's presence loomed behind us, its footsteps now a relentless thudding echo. We burst into the backyard, gasping for air. Ethan was there, looking confused. "What's going on? Why are you guys so freaked out?" Before we could answer, a loud crash echoed from inside the house. The back door slammed shut on its own, the windows rattling as though the house itself was angry. We all stood frozen, staring at the darkened windows. Whatever was in there, it wasn't done with us. Desperate for answers, we huddled together, trying to piece together what had happened. Josh finally spoke, his voice shaking. I saw it before. The last time we played here. I didn't say anything because I thought I was imagining it. But it's real. It's been watching us. Ethan's face turned pale. That thing has been here before? What does it want? None of us had an answer. But one thing was clear. We couldn't go back inside. Not now, not ever. The game of hide-and-seek had become something far more sinister, and we were just pawns in a game we didn't understand. That night, we left Ethan's house, vowing never to return. But the memory stayed with us, haunting our dreams. The shadowy figure, the cold, empty eyes, the whispers. It was all too real. And though we never spoke of it again, each of us knew we had been marked by something far beyond our comprehension. Years later, I still hear those whispers in the dead of night, reminding me of the game we played, a game where something else was playing too. And I wonder, was it just a coincidence, or had we stumbled into something we were never meant to find? Even the most innocent games can take a dark turn when you're not alone. If you've ever felt like something was watching, lurking in the shadows, maybe you're right. Some games shouldn't be played. Have you ever had a similar experience? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales that will keep you up at night. I stepped into the coffee shop late that evening, hoping for nothing more than a warm drink to end a long day. The place was dimly lit, almost empty, with a stillness that felt out of place. As I approached the counter, I noticed the barista already staring at me, their gaze intense and unsettling, as though they'd been waiting just for me. Their eyes held a strange familiarity, like they knew me, knew things about me I hadn't told anyone. Before I could speak, the barista's lips curved into a slight smile, and in a low, haunting voice they said, "I knew you'd come tonight, and I know what's coming next." I stepped further into the dim, almost shadowy coffee shop, the warm aroma of coffee mingling with something heavier, something that felt thick and strange in the air. The place looked different somehow despite my frequent visits. Tonight the light seemed weaker, flickering with a low, uneasy hum. The walls, usually painted in comforting shades of amber, felt darker, as if they were closing in. Shadows stretched across the floor like they had a life of their own, and the emptiness of the shop amplified each small sound. My footsteps, the creak of the floor, even my breath, which seemed to hang in the air, just visible in the dim light. I moved toward the counter, my eyes instinctively searching for the warmth of another presence. A reassuring smile, perhaps. But tonight, the barista looked different. They stood there, unmoving, their face partially obscured in the shadows. Their gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I felt trapped under the weight of that stare, the type of look that digs past skin and bones and settles somewhere in your soul. Despite the chill creeping down my spine, I managed to offer a weak smile, a casual gesture that felt hollow in the heavy silence between us. "Just the usual, please," I said, forcing a steadiness in my voice. Without a word, they began preparing my coffee. But the silence was dense, almost suffocating, and my eyes kept drifting toward the corners of the shop, where shadows seemed darker, almost pulsing. A faint sound drifted from somewhere near the back, a whisper, barely audible, yet distinct enough to send a chill along my arms. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking, but there was no one else. Just the barista and me, surrounded by silence and shadows, felt more alive with each passing second. "Long day?" I offered, more out of a need to fill the eerie quiet than anything else. But they didn't respond. Instead, they simply handed me my coffee, their fingers brushing mine for a fleeting second. Their skin was cold, almost unnaturally so, and I fought the instinct to pull my hand away. As I wrapped my fingers around the warm cup, the barista finally spoke, their voice low and steady. "It must be hard being alone every night, with no one waiting for you at home." The words cut through me, and my chest tightened. I hadn't mentioned anything about my life outside of polite small talk, but the barista's words were too specific, too intimate. They hadn't broken eye contact, and in that moment, it felt like they could see right through me. "Excuse me," I managed, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. They continued, ignoring my question, their voice calm and even, as though they were reciting from memory. You often sit by the window, scrolling through old messages, looking at pictures, trying to remember what it felt like before the quiet got so loud. My grip tightened on the coffee cup, my knuckles white against the warmth. A knot of unease twisted in my stomach as the air around me felt colder. I glanced toward the door, considering leaving, but something held me there. Some pull I couldn't explain, a mix of fear and a dark curiosity that kept my feet rooted. I swallowed, struggling to find words, my mind racing through questions I couldn't voice. How could they know? The barista leaned in slightly, their eyes narrowing as they spoke, each word hitting like a low, slow pulse. You're going to take a walk tonight, aren't you? The one you take every Tuesday. The street lamp by the corner will flicker when you pass, just like it always does. You'll look over your shoulder. You always do. But tonight, something's going to be different. I froze, my pulse racing as I gripped the warm coffee cup, clinging to the comfort of its heat. My usual Tuesday walks were a ritual I'd never mentioned to anyone. How could they possibly know? My eyes darted to the door, calculating the steps it would take to make a quick exit. But my legs felt leaden, as if something were anchoring me there. Despite the urge to run, I found myself staying, pulled by a dreadful curiosity. The barista's voice lowered, each word echoing louder in my mind. You'll see someone standing under that broken streetlight tonight. They leaned closer, their voice dropping to a whisper. And they'll be waiting for you. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt a sharp pang of unease deep in my gut. The way they said it, so calm and certain, was enough to send a wave of nausea through me. I wanted to believe it was a cruel joke, something twisted meant to spook me. But as I looked into their eyes, I could tell they weren't just saying it to scare me. They were warning me, and the weight of that realization settled heavy and cold inside my chest. I cleared my throat, trying to steady my voice, but it came out thin and shaky. That's enough. I don't know how you know these things, but I'm leaving. I forced a step back, but my feet dragged, as though something unseen was pressing down on me, urging me to stay and listen. The barista's face remained impassive, almost bored, as if my reaction was exactly what they expected. You can try to leave, they said quietly, their eyes never leaving mine. But the future has a funny way of pulling you back. Some things you can't escape. Those last words echoed in my head as I staggered toward the door, my heart hammering wildly. As I pushed the door open, the night air hit me, sharp and cold. But there was a strange resistance, like the air itself didn't want me to leave. My gaze flickered back to the barista, who was still watching me, that same hauntingly calm expression on their face. The finality of their words hung in the air, making it feel like a warning and a promise. I forced myself out onto the street, but the barista's voice, low and steady, reverberated in my mind. You'll see them under the streetlight, waiting just for you. As I walked, every flickering light, every shadow seemed sharper, heavier, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes on my back, just as the barista had predicted. As I stumbled down the dimly lit street, the barista's words clung to me like a shadow. The cold night air bit into my skin, but it did nothing to clear the fog of dread clouding my mind. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me out of my thoughts. I fumbled for it, my hands unsteady, and glanced at the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in me knew I had to answer. My heart hammered as I raised the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice shaky. Silence crackled on the other end, but then a faint, trembling voice came through, a voice I hadn't heard in years. Is this you?" The shock of recognition sent a jolt through me. It was an old friend, someone I had lost touch with ages ago, a person who had drifted out of my life so gradually I'd nearly forgotten them. But the fear in their voice was unmistakable, and it mirrored my own. How did you?" I stammered, unable to finish the question. The barista's words echoed in my mind, a prediction I'd brushed off as nonsense now unfolding before me in real time. "Listen to me." My friend's voice shook, barely a whisper. "Don't go home tonight. Whatever you do, don't go back there." My blood ran cold, and I felt my legs weaken beneath me. "What are you talking about? How do you know?" "Please just listen," they interrupted, their voice rising in desperation. "I can't explain, but something terrible is waiting for you. I can feel it." The line went dead, leaving only the hollow ring of silence. I stared at my phone, heart pounding, the street around me feeling emptier, darker, more oppressive than before. Desperate for some reassurance, I told myself it was a prank, a sick joke to rattle me. But even as I tried to shake off the fear, the world around me began to distort. My eyes caught movement in the shadows, flickers of images that weren't there a moment before. I blinked hard, but the visions remained, clearer with each passing second. A streetlight flickered overhead, casting a distorted shadow across the pavement. And in that shadow, I saw something that made my skin crawl. A glimpse of myself, lying motionless, my eyes wide and staring at nothing. I stumbled backward, breaking the vision. But the image had burned itself into my mind, searing and vivid. My breaths grew shallow as another vision overtook me. My front door, slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out from within. And just beyond the threshold, a figure loomed in the darkness, its face obscured but its gaze fixed on me, waiting. The visions came in waves, faster and more brutal, each more disturbing than the last. My own reflection staring back with hollow, lifeless eyes. Dark skeletal hands reaching from shadows, stretching towards me. Each one dissolved as quickly as it appeared, leaving me disoriented, trembling, my heart hammering against my chest like it was trying to escape. I staggered forward, the ground feeling unsteady beneath my feet, as if the very world around me was shifting, molding itself to the barista's sinister predictions. Each step I took felt heavier, as though I were being drawn, unwillingly, toward a fate I couldn't escape. The world grew darker, colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was indeed waiting for me. Just as they had said, something terrible, lurking just out of sight. The coffee shop seemed to warp around me, the walls subtly bending and stretching, almost as though I'd been pulled into a waking dream. Shadows clung to every corner, shifting with an unnatural life of their own, and I felt a deep, gnawing sense of something I couldn't explain, something both ancient and alive, watching me from within those shadows. I could feel it in the strange flicker of the lights, in the uneasy chill that filled the air. My skin prickled, every instinct in me urging me to leave, but a heavy dread kept me rooted in place. The barista watched me, their face strangely calm, as though they knew exactly what I was feeling. What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My throat felt tight, like I was speaking against some unseen force that wanted to silence me. The barista's expression shifted slightly, their lips curling into a grim smile that held no warmth. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" they said softly, almost as though speaking to themselves. They leaned forward, their eyes dark and unreadable. "This isn't just a coffee shop. It's somewhere in between. A place where time blurs and the boundaries between what is and what will be start to thin." I could feel my pulse racing, a cold sweat breaking out along the back of my neck. "In between what?" The barista's gaze bore into mine, each word falling like a stone, heavy with meaning. "In between now and what's coming," they said. "This place exists on the edge of fate, where choices shape outcomes and where warnings are given, if one is willing to listen." My stomach twisted as I tried to process their words, every fiber of my being screaming that I shouldn't be here. And yet, I felt trapped, drawn deeper into whatever twisted game this was. Warnings? About what? The barista's smile faded, replaced by an expression of grave seriousness. "About what you must do to avoid what you saw. But this path requires you to follow certain rules." They spoke slowly, each word sinking in like a cold weight. "What rules?" I asked, my voice cracking. I didn't want to hear their answer, but some part of me needed to know. Their eyes never left mine, their voice dropping to a low, almost hypnotic tone. "You must avoid the path you're planning to take tonight. Don't go left at the street corner, go right instead. And whatever you do, don't look back if you hear footsteps behind you." A chill ran down my spine as I absorbed their words. What happens if I don't follow these rules? The barista's gaze darkened, a flicker of something almost like pity in their eyes. "If you stray from this path, you'll see things you aren't meant to see, things that exist on the other side. And once you've seen them, they can see you too. My mind raced with questions, with doubts, yet something in their tone made it impossible to ignore. I felt a growing terror, a horrible certainty that there was something lurking just beyond my understanding, something waiting for me on the path I had intended to take. My heart pounded, a suffocating sense of dread tightening around me. But why me? Why tell me this? The barista's gaze softened, their face inscrutable, as if they'd heard this question countless times before. Because tonight is a night of choices, and some choices can save you, or damn you. All I can do is warn you. A silence fell between us, dense and absolute. I felt the weight of their words settling over me, pressing down until it became difficult to breathe. This wasn't a game or some cruel joke. It was real. The moment I turned to leave, the coffee shop shifted around me, as if the walls were alive, stretching and bending in impossible ways. I took a step, then another, my eyes locked on the door, but each step felt heavier, as if something unseen was pulling me back. The shadows around me seemed to grow, thickening like ink in water, swallowing up the dim light until the room looked more like a dark void than a place I'd once known. I reached out for the door, fingers trembling, but when I tried to push it open, it wouldn't budge. Panic clawed up my throat, a quiet desperation building in my chest. I forced myself to turn around, hoping to find another way out, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Every corner, every familiar nook of the shop had vanished, replaced by an endless, twisting maze of corridors that stretched on into shadow. There was no counter, no tables, no exit, only a series of dark paths that wound and looped back on themselves as if the place itself was trapping me, twisting my sense of direction and reality. My heart thundered as I moved forward, every step echoing with the low hum of silence. And then, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from, I saw the barista again, standing just a few feet ahead, watching me with that same, unnerving stillness. Their face was barely illuminated, yet their eyes gleamed, colder and sharper than before, as if they were feeding off my fear. It was as though they had been waiting there all along, just one step ahead, no matter how far I walked. "You're making it worse," they whispered, their voice smooth and eerie, echoing through the silence. "Every step you take draws you closer to them." I swallowed hard, dread tightening like a vice in my chest. Closer to who? My voice was little more than a whisper, lost in the thick, dark air. The barista's lips curled into a smile, one that held no warmth, only a chilling satisfaction. "To those who wait on the other side, those who've watched you for longer than you'd care to know. If you keep going, they'll find you." I took a step back, but the ground seemed to shift beneath me, tilting and pulling me off balance. I stumbled, my heart pounding as I realized there was no way out of this warped labyrinth. Every path led back to the barista, who stood there with that ominous knowing smile, as if they controlled the very air I breathed. "Why are you doing this?" I choked out, desperation clawing its way into my voice. "Why won't you let me go?" They tilted their head slightly, their gaze never wavering. "You made a choice when you came in here, even if you didn't realize it, and now you'll have to face the consequences." Their voice lowered to a sinister murmur. "But if you'd like, I can show you what awaits if you continue down this path." A shiver ran through me, and I felt rooted in place, torn between terror and a grim curiosity I couldn't shake. As if sensing my hesitation, the barista's voice took on a gentle, almost coaxing tone. "Would you like to know what happens if you don't listen? What you'll see if you stray from the rules?" My breath hitched, but I couldn't find the strength to answer. They leaned closer, their face close enough that I could see the cold glint in their eyes. "You'll see them, the ones who watch from the dark. They're always waiting, just out of sight, waiting for the moment you slip. And once you do, they'll make sure you never leave." The words sank into my bones like ice, and I felt a horrifying clarity settle over me. Whatever this place was, whatever force the barista commanded, it wasn't going to let me leave unscathed. Every choice I made here felt like a step closer to a fate I couldn't outrun. My pulse quickened as the barista's gaze held me captive, their expression unchanging, yet filled with an intensity that made my stomach twist. I could feel the weight of their words, lingering in the heavy silence that followed, the vague prophecy creeping into my mind and settling there like a dark shadow. The way they looked at me, like they knew exactly how this night would end, sent a chill down my spine. I managed to tear my eyes away from theirs, my voice cracking as I forced out a question, though I could barely keep my hand steady. What choice am I supposed to make? The words felt feeble, barely breaking through the dense air around us. Part of me didn't even want to know, but I couldn't stand the gnawing dread creeping into every part of me, like something slowly wrapping around my chest, pressing tighter with each second. The barista's gaze softened, almost as if they pitied me, though the feeling only seemed to make things worse. "It's not for me to tell," they replied softly, each word deliberate, laden with a kind of finality. "That's part of the journey. You'll face it soon enough, and in that moment you'll know." Their words stirred something deep in me: anger, fear, helplessness. I wanted to shout, to demand more answers, but the look on their face told me it would be useless. They were a spectator, guiding me to the edge of something terrifying, but unwilling to reveal what lay at the bottom of the fall. A shudder ran through me, the reality settling into my bones. Whatever was coming couldn't be avoided. It was as if my path had already been set, but I didn't know where it led, or if I'd even survive it. Each second seemed to stretch, my heart thudding louder in the silence, every beat like a countdown I couldn't stop. The barista leaned closer, their voice dropping to a whisper that barely reached my ears. "You'll see something tonight, something that will force you to choose, and once you make that choice, there's no turning back." I stared at them, searching for any hint of mercy, of some way out, but their eyes were a void, betraying nothing. I felt trapped, helplessly bound to whatever fate awaited me, and a knot of despair twisted in my chest. Then, just as quickly as they'd spoken, the barista straightened, their face once again a mask, unreadable, impassive. Without another word, they turned and vanished into the shadows of the shop, leaving me standing there, alone, as the silence wrapped around me like a noose. I bolted out of the coffee shop, my breath catching in my throat as I burst through the door and into the street. But as I stumbled onto the pavement, a wave of confusion hit me. Something was wrong. Terribly, unmistakably wrong. The familiar street I had walked 100 times before now seemed altered. The buildings, normally bustling and lit, were cast in an eerie shadow, each window dark and empty, as though I had stepped into a different version of my world. A version without life. My footsteps echoed louder than they should have, bouncing off the silent buildings that seemed to loom over me. A thick fog curled along the ground, winding around my ankles like something alive, and every step felt slower, like I was wading through a nightmare that wouldn't let me go. The street stretched endlessly, twisting and turning in ways it never had before. I could barely recognize my surroundings, yet each turn felt painfully familiar, pulling me deeper into the chilling realization that I was somehow trapped in a version of my own neighborhood, warped and silent, like a ghostly reflection. Then, I saw it. A street lamp flickering at the corner, casting a sickly yellow glow on the sidewalk. It was just like the barista had described. My heart raced as I forced myself forward, drawn to it by both fear and a morbid curiosity. The closer I got, the more certain I became that I was stepping directly into the future they had foretold. Each detail falling into place like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't stop from forming. As I passed under the street lamp, it dimmed and sputtered before dying completely, leaving me in near total darkness. My breath caught, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But when I looked over my shoulder, the street behind me had vanished, replaced by a dense fog swallowing up everything in its path. There was no way back. I forced myself to keep walking, the silence pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. My mind raced with fragments of the barista's words, and with each step they grew louder, echoing in my mind like a haunting melody. "They're waiting for you. They're always watching." Then I saw it, a shadowy figure standing a few yards ahead, motionless, waiting. As I took another step forward, the figure ahead sharpened into view, dark and still beneath the broken street lamp. My stomach twisted, and I could feel the cold seep through my bones as I realized this was exactly what the barista had warned me about. The street around me seemed to fall away, leaving just me and the figure, standing there as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. I stopped, frozen, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I tried to comprehend what was in front of me. The figure didn't move, yet the longer I looked, the more I sensed something deeply wrong. Its shape was almost human, but the edges blurred and wavered like smoke, as if it existed somewhere between this world and something darker, something ancient and hungry. Then a voice, low, familiar, and dripping with malice, cut through the silence. "You made your choice the moment you stepped through that door," it said. The figure didn't move its mouth. The words seemed to echo from all around, seeping into my mind like poison. I tried to turn and run, but my body wouldn't respond, as though an unseen force held me there, rooted in place. My pulse thundered, the realization dawning on me in waves of panic. This was the choice the barista had spoken of, and I was out of options. Slowly, the figure stretched out a hand, its fingers impossibly long and shadowed, reaching toward me. I felt a pull, an overwhelming urge to take that hand, though every instinct screamed at me to resist. But the weight of its gaze was unbearable, pressing down until it was hard to breathe. "You can fight, but it won't matter," the voice whispered, almost tender, mocking. "Fate has a funny way of keeping its promises." In that moment, I knew. This wasn't a choice. The barista's prophecy was no warning, it was a sentence. Whether I took the hand or turned away, I was bound to this path, bound to whatever horror lay ahead. Summoning every last shred of strength, I tore my gaze away and tried to step back, but as I did, the figure's shadow stretched, wrapping around me like dark tendrils, pulling me toward it. My vision blurred, and all I could hear was the echo of my heartbeat, fading as the shadow consumed me. As darkness closed in, the barista's final words rang out in my mind, chilling and absolute. "Once you see them, they'll never let you go."